Hello, everyone. If you're in central Pennsylvania, I hope that you are staying warm today. It got cold all of a sudden after that warm front we had last week. But I am trying something very much outside my comfort zone today in going live on all the platforms that I'm on to try to clarify a question that comes up a lot in taxes and your W 2 and who's really getting the bigger refund at the end of the day. So let's kind of look at the basics of your 1040 and your W-2 to see what's really happening on there and why your refund is not something that you should be paying attention to see how much of your money the IRS or the government really got. So let's play who really won the tax payment game quickly. So we have two players in this game. Taxpayer number one, who has wages of $50,000, standard deduction of $10,000, and these numbers are completely made up, everyone. So, don't comment, hey, that's not a true amount. I know it's not. Just making up these numbers for this situation. They have a dependent under 17, so they're going to get the child tax credit. They also have a 19-year-old dependent who's taken a gap year, not in college yet, so there's no college credits in this particular situation. Because of their wages, we're putting them in the 15% tax bracket, and they have $4,000 withheld on their paycheck throughout the year that's going to the IRS. Taxpayer number two also has $50,000 in wages. However, their spouse also works and makes another $40,000 to bring home to the family. They also have the standard deduction of $10,000 and a dependent under 17. So again, they're getting that child tax credit. However, their 19-year-old is in college, so there's going to be some college credits that affect their tax return. And because they have additional income with the spouse working, we're putting them in the 20% tax bracket. And the taxpayer is having $7,500 withheld from their paycheck, and the spouse is having $4,800. So the only similarities between these two taxpayers are that they're each making $50,000. They're both getting the $10,000 standard deduction, and they each have a child under the age of 17 at home. After that, the similarities end. So you can see the differences between these, and these are the differences that are going to change how much they give to the government and how much their refund is at the end of the year. So that's why we don't want to look at that refund. We want to look at how much you actually owed the government. So gross income, this is the first calculation you do on your tax return to see how much you actually made during the year. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the part of the game that you want to win first and foremost. Taxpayer number one is bringing home wages of $50,000. Taxpayer two is bringing home wages of $50,000 as well. Their spouse is also making $40,000. So there's $90,000 coming into their household to help pay expenses and maybe go on vacations, whatever it is that they need to live. Taxpayer one is making a little less. Now, that's strictly a numbers game. There's intrinsic value to maybe the spouse not working, or maybe this is a single parent. The initial tax calculation, taxpayer number one, if you recall, was in the 15% tax bracket. So if we were not looking at anything, if this was strictly a flat tax situation like a lot of people were calling for, we would end the game right here. Taxpayer number one would pay in $7,500, which is 15% of their income that they're earning. Taxpayer number two would pay in $18,000 to the government because they have additional wages from the spouse, and that's putting them in the 20% tax bracket. So right now, comparing this, taxpayer two is well over double the initial tax calculation of taxpayer number one. Deductions on their return. To keep things simple, we're just giving them each the standard deduction of $10,000, which means that their net income is $40,000 for taxpayer number one and $80,000 for taxpayer number two. Now, here is how deductions work. So whether you're a small business owner or even on your individual income tax return, think of deductions as coupons. The higher tax bracket you are in, the more that deduction is worth. It is not a dollar for dollar tax savings. So it only lowers your taxable income, which is then computed at your tax rate. It's not zeroing out the tax that you owe to the government. So taxpayer number one, because they're in the 15% bracket, that $10,000 standard deduction is worth $1,500 to them. Taxpayer number two is paying more in taxes and they're in a higher tax bracket. So that same $10,000 deduction is worth $2,000 in taxable income. So it's not complete tax savings. I don't want to say that, but it's lessening their taxable income by $2,000. Now, after we get to your taxable income, which if we go back, so now taxpayer number one has $6,000 of tax, their $40,000 of taxable income. And so their tax is $6,000. Taxpayer number two had $80,000 of taxable income after the standard deduction. So their tax is $16,000. So now credits, these are actually a dollar for dollar. So think of these like the government paying part of your taxes for you. So these are kind of like grants you're getting from the government. Maybe you could look at it that way, that we calculate your actual tax that you owe the government, and then this takes away what you actually have to write the check for. So taxpayer number one owed tax of $6,000. Because they have a child under 17, they're getting the child tax credit of $2,000. And they also had the child over 17 who's not yet in college, so they get $500 for that. So their tax calculation goes from $6,000 down to $3,500. This is the number you should pay attention to on your tax return. That's what you actually owe the government. So don't look at withholdings. Don't look at what, refunds, what your neighbor got. Your tax liability is what you want to pay attention to. So taxpayer number one at the end of the day is in some way, shape, or form going to pay the government $3,500. Taxpayer number two had taxes due of $16,000 from their wages. But they also have the child tax credit of $2,000 like number one did. They also have the other dependent credit for the 19-year-old of $500. The 19-year-old in their situation is also in college, so they have all the school bills to pay, but they also get a credit from the government of $4,000 to help offset some of that school expense. So their tax due to the government went from $16,000 down to $9,500. So that is what, in one way, shape, or form, they're going to owe the government at the end of the day. It's $9,500. Now, payments. Think of this like you're going to the register to pay your bill for dinner at the end of the day. So taxpayer number one isn't making quite as much money. Maybe he ordered the chicken dinner, and so he owed $3,500 for what he purchased at the end of the day. He had withholdings on his paychecks of $4,000. That's why he's getting the refund of $500. It's not that he got $500 back from the government. He didn't. He paid the government $3,500. It's just that he overpaid it from the prepayments from his W-2 by $500. Taxpayer number two had a tax liability of $9,500 on their tax return. They had $7,500 withheld from the first paycheck, and their spouse had $4,800 withheld from their paycheck. So they're getting a larger refund of $2,800, but which one paid more in tax? Taxpayer number two paid almost triple in tax what taxpayer number one did. So they got a bigger refund. They also actually paid a lot more in tax. It's just they had more withholdings to offset what they paid in. So they just walked into the restaurant before they ordered their lobster dinner. They had to prepay their dinner a lot more than taxpayer number one did. So when they cashed out, they got more money back. So think of it that way, and what you're actually spending versus what refund you're getting back at the end of the day. So just to kind of recap this, look at all the numbers to see, and everybody's going to have a different answer on this. You might be okay with making less money than your neighbor because you're working less, or you just want to simplify your life. So there's a lot more things than you have to look at. What the refund you're getting on your tax return should not be how you determine if your taxes are fair, if you're paying too much or too little, or if you're making enough money. So look at the big picture and paying as little tax as you can, but what you're really looking at is that tax calculation, not your refund at the end of the day. So if you're smart, you're going to keep that refund down as little as possible. So taxpayer number one getting that refund is actually, in my opinion, in a better situation than taxpayer number two, because taxpayer number one kept more of their hard earned money in their pocket all year. So keep that money, spend it on groceries, save it, put it in a savings somewhere, but do something with it other than giving it to the IRS and getting that refund back of the year. You're giving the IRS an interest-free loan is what you're doing. So I hope that anyone that watches this restream or was on here live while I was doing this, I hope this was helpful. I would love to see any comments that you have. And I'm going to try to do more of these until I get more comfortable in front of the camera and it doesn't feel so foreign to me. So have a wonderful afternoon. And if you're not already doing so, please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all those places so I can keep getting more information and get the word out. Have a great afternoon, everyone.